Season 4, Episode 3, Why Allocation is About Load, Not Percentages. When people talk about portfolio allocation, the conversation almost always begins with percentages: 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, maybe a small allocation to real estate, perhaps a little cash. The exact numbers change depending on the advisor, the strategy, or the moment in the market, but the language is almost always the same. Percentages. At first glance, this seems perfectly reasonable. Percentages are neat. They are easy to communicate. They create the appearance of balance. But percentages hide something important. They describe how capital is divided. They do not explain what the capital is supposed to do. And that difference matters more than most investors realize. Think of a bridge. An engineer designing a bridge does not begin by asking, what percentage of the bridge should be steel? What percentage should be concrete? Those questions come later. The first question is always about load. How much weight must the bridge carry? How many vehicles will cross it each day? What kinds of forces, wind, weather, vibration, will the structure experience over time? Only after understanding the load does the engineer decide how the structure must be built. Percentages follow function, not the other way around. Portfolios should be designed in exactly the same way, but many investors start with percentages instead of load. They choose allocations because they sound balanced, or because they resemble what others are doing, or because they appear in a model portfolio somewhere. But without understanding the load the portfolio must carry, those numbers are mostly arbitrary. So what is the load of a portfolio? In simple terms, the load is the work the capital must perform. For some investors, that load is almost entirely about growth. The portfolio exists to expand over time. It does not need to produce income. It does not need to support spending. Its job is simply to participate in long-term economic progress. In this case, the load placed on growth capital is very high, and the structure of the portfolio will reflect that. But as life evolves, the load begins to change. Eventually, the portfolio may need to support spending. Income becomes important. Stability becomes important. The portfolio must now perform multiple functions at the same time. It must continue growing, but it must also produce reliable cash flow, and it must remain stable enough that the investor does not feel forced to sell assets during difficult market periods. The machine is now carrying more weight, and that changes how the system must be designed. This is why percentages can sometimes mislead. Two investors may have identical allocations, the same percentages, the same asset classes. But if their portfolios are carrying different loads, those allocations may be entirely inappropriate for one of them. A portfolio that works perfectly for a 35-year-old accumulating capital may be completely unsuitable for a retiree, depending on that portfolio for income. The numbers might look the same, but the load is very different, and load determines structure. Understanding load also changes how we think about risk. When portfolios are designed around percentages alone, risk is often measured in market terms: volatility, drawdowns, market cycles. But when portfolios are designed around load, risk begins to look different. Risk becomes the possibility that the portfolio cannot perform the job it was designed to perform. Can it continue growing when growth is required? Can it produce income when income is required? Can it remain stable enough that the investor can remain patient during market turbulence? Those are structural questions, not market predictions. When you begin to think this way, allocation becomes much more intuitive. Instead of asking, what percentage should I place in each category? You begin asking, how much work must each part of the portfolio perform? How much growth must the system produce over time? How much income must it generate? How much stability is required so the system remains resilient? Once those answers are clear, the structure of the portfolio begins to reveal itself naturally. The machine begins to take shape. This is why good portfolio design rarely begins with percentages. It begins with purpose. It begins with load. Because load determines how the system must be built. Percentages simply describe the structure once it exists. In the next episode, we'll begin looking more closely at the first major role capital can play within the portfolio machine: growth. But not growth for its own sake. Growth as something more specific: the process of incubating future income. Because the most powerful growth portfolios are not just expanding wealth, They are quietly building the income streams that will eventually support life.